So I'm going to follow that up, and I'm going to explain the structure of the systems around looked after children and why it is they're actually very useful. So, the way that we have developed our ability to protect children, which has been substantially undermined by institutional transformation in the last not just 8 years, by a reflex response from a belief system blind to these systems. But what we have done with these systems is we have developed the ability to learn from crisis. So crisis generally have a structure, and the top line of the crisis is everyone's looking for scalps and absolution, which powers the crisis. But underneath it, social work is largely about learning from crisis and having systems which develop and learn from crisis. So we have been doing that, and we now should be at the point where the learning that's occurred over the period since the last crisis should be reviewed, and that's actually fairly straightforward. Now, local authorities are not solely responsible for looked after children. There's a judicial oversight, and it's worth having a look at Sir James Monby and the judgments that he has made public. Now, he presides over the family court system, and it's public family law who outlines responsibilities to look after children, and you can find that in the Children's Act 1989, and that will outline the responsibilities of the state to these children, and it will also outline the responsibilities of families. And with all looked after children, we share parental responsibility. We do not ever take it. Families retain parental responsibility, and we work in partnership with those families. And we recognise that even when those children are in the looked after system's care, that their primary strength is going to be their families. And we do that, or we should be doing that. We don't really do it as much as we should now, but we do know this, and we have developed this. Now, within the Children's Act, you see a piece of legislation which is underpinned by several principles. And what's going to happen during the child abuse inquiry is that piece of legislation is going to be reviewed. And the likely outcome of it is that we will expand a principle called the principle of paramountcy. And that is the principle that the child's welfare should be the paramount consideration. And paramount is a very important legal term. It means above all others. Now, currently, that principle applies to families. So all decisions within a family, children should be the paramount consideration within all others. And then during the course of the lifespan of the Children's Act, which is kind of 30 years old now, it came in when I was like 10 or 11. God, I was the same age as Rachel when it came in. So it's quite old. I'm old. But this principle of paramountcy was gradually expanded to cover. We started to bring it in because it's a piece of legislation that covers family, and it covers provision for children where the state is their family. And then we expanded this principle to cover other institutions, so that what happened is, because of these principles at the core of this legislation for about 30 years, all the institutions connected around children, education, health, social care, they're aware of these principles, and these principles quietly shape everything that they do, and they shape all the multi-agency working. And so through these basic principles you can see how these systems function. Now, because of the nature of what will be revealed during the child abuse inquiry, we will examine the relationship between other institutions and these children, and the vulnerability and the power dynamics, and we will probably expand the principle of paramountcy to other institutions and policy making and media. That's coming. Now, that will be a change that barely anybody in the political press notices. That's a fucking earthquake coming, by the way. And that completely changes the baseline of policy making and completely changes policy making. Now, right now, one of the most depressing conversations I've had in recent years was with the director of a think tank, who I like very much. He's a very, very amiable chap, a very clever chap, incredibly clever. And he kind of glibly, in the middle of a conversation, said, "Oh, well, we don't really know what child protection." Well, I didn't know that child protection was a mess, because they don't think about it. So what we're also going to have to acknowledge is that when you look at the children in the looked after system, what you are seeing through their stories is not the poor who need pity. You are seeing intersecting failure. And we are, one of the grimmest things about us is we are the walking worst case scenario all the fucking time. We are the terrible, nasty what if. What if this fails? What if that fails? And that's what these children are. And as such, the data they produce is an invaluable resource to tell you about policy failure elsewhere. I put money. I don't have any money. But if I did have money, I would put money that if you check, you'll barely notice it happening. And however big this crisis, in fact, the bigger this crisis, the better things will be for looked after children. Because what happens during these periods, if you look at the evolution of these systems through World War II, it was actually the major crisis of World War II that woke us up to the conditions children were living in. And we barely even noticed that happening. I would put money on it. 5 years, that's the bottom line. Now, because the looked after children puts an end to discussion of the deserving and undeserving poor, it also puts an end to the identity of anybody who believes that their identity is about deciding what's good for the poor, which is why The Guardian is so hostile to looked after children in those services, and which is why Owen Jones has placed his entire identity on looked after children not existing, and which is why Novara Media have just spent 8 years preventing discussion of political consensus. Because when they realised what I was saying, they realised that the choice was their identity or mine. Well, just a message to all the fucking privileged lefties that have attacked me in the last 8 years because you knew that my identity meant yours no longer had a function. That's still the case. Brexit means a consolidation of those duties. In addition, because we'll have to sort through our responsibilities to children and our relationship and our child protection in terms of our relationship with Europe, they will receive more examination. So, this is a message to The Guardian, the Labour Party, the New Statesman, Novara Media, and all the fucking psychopaths who've been lashing out at me. You are lashing out at me because the existence of looked after children means that your identity is no longer valid. It's not. You're going to have to adapt, and you're going to have to learn to mix a little bit more safely with us on the internet.